Hey, 7th graders. Sorry, I just got back from working out, so I haven't showered yet. But I wanted to start by giving you a few recipes for paper mache paste that you can do at home. The first one, the easiest one, if you have any of this stuff, you can use it straight out of the bottle. I would recommend, if you're using this, to use like one of those foam brushes or a paintbrush to apply it, and I'll go over how to apply it and everything. It's really the same method. You're just using a paintbrush instead of your hands. And this, just know that you need to really wash out those paintbrushes well if you ever want to use them again. So this, and it can be matte or gloss, doesn't matter. But if you have that, that's a super easy way to use paper mache. If you do any paint pouring, if you have a pouring medium or a liquid polymer at home, that again, used the exact same way as Mod Podge. So you would use a brush, you wouldn't use your hands with that, and you would need to make sure that you wash out the brush really well with soap and water. Then there's two other methods that you can use. The first one just uses glue. It can be clear glue, it can be glitter glue, it can be white glue, it doesn't matter. You would just mix 3/4 part glue with 1/4 part water. So I usually start with about a cup. So you would use 3/4 cups glue mixed with 1/4 cup water, and you would use your fingers for this, not a brush. This is probably the one that I'm going to end up using for this project, just because I have so much glue in my house. So my kids went on a slime kick and then I stopped allowing them to make slime because they kept getting it everywhere. So I have a ton of glue, so that's the method I'm probably going to use. The other way I put in the description for this video, and that is, there's two methods that use flour. The first one, you just mix 1 part flour to 1 part water, stir together, and it makes sort of like a pasty, goopy type of mixture. And again, you'd use your fingers for that. Now the downside of that one is if you don't use it all right away, you can't keep it. It doesn't save. It starts to mold and it smells. So, but once you put it on your sculpture, you don't have that problem because it'll be able to dry, but you can't keep it wet. So that one, in a bind, it's great. And I've used it and it works really well because it's that gluten. If you have a gluten allergy, you might not have that flour in the house, but it can be wheat flour, it can be white flour, it doesn't matter. But that gluten that sticks to some people's insides and that gives it bread that nice chewy texture, that forms a glue. So that is why that works. The last method, which is probably the most effective, but it's a little bit more work, is to take 1 part flour to 5 parts water, and then you boil it. And you actually put it on the stove, put it in a pan, mix it together, wait till it boils. When it comes to a boil, you turn off the heat, set it off to the side and let it cool. And that is a super effective paper mache paste. You can keep it in a Ziploc container, like a Tupperware container, for like a week in the fridge, I would say. But it definitely holds the best. It's the best option, and it's definitely the best as far as viscosity is concerned, because that gluten really gets to work. So you have fewer chunks, you don't have to worry about it molding, and it's a good texture to work with. So if you have the means to do that, that's great. Hopefully one of these options will work for you. If none of those options work for you, shoot me an email and we will figure something out. But hopefully one of those 5 options, either the glue and water, the Mod Podge, the pouring medium or matte medium, or one of the flour methods, will give you some options. So the first thing that you're going to want to do for this video is mix up your paper mache paste. And I would start with about a cup total, maybe a cup and a half. It really depends on how big your sculpture is. So you can always mix more if you need to. Okay? All right, so after you've mixed that, we'll see you back here. All right, so once you've made your paper mache paste, and then either it's cooling or it's sitting or whatever, you are going to need to make the strips with which you're going to do your paper mache. So the best thing to use for this is newspaper. If you don't have newspaper, you can use regular white paper, you can use scrap paper, you can use construction paper, whatever you want. Just know that eventually you're going to have to paint over it. So newspaper provides a really good base. It's a nice thin paper. So that's ideal. Hopefully you can find some of that somewhere. And the cool thing about newspaper is it tells you which way you need to rip it. If you try to rip it the wrong way, it won't rip. So I always start from the fold, and I'll take a pretty good sized chunk of newspaper. And if you start from the fold, you can rip a pretty straight strip as you go down. Okay, now these are really long strips, and you're gonna end up needing to cut them down or rip them down a little bit. But it is better to rip your strips than to cut them. The ripped edges overlap better than cut edges, so you'll get a much smoother surface. So I would recommend ripping your newspapers up instead of cutting them. So get yourself a really good pile of newspaper, because you actually end up having to do about 3 coats of paper mache in total. We're just going to do our first coat today because it is the most time consuming and you do really have to be careful with it. And then in that second and third coat, you can actually add a few more details if you need to, but we'll go over that. So you want to have a really good pile of newspaper, because even if you don't use it for today's lesson, you'll use it next week. Okay, so I'm going to let you go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back here in a little bit. Okay, so we are ready to start paper macheing. I have my 3/4 glue, 1/4 water mixture here. Just stir it with a popsicle stick. Got all my strips. Now, right now, your strips are really long. The strips being that long are not going to make this easier for you. Whenever I'm paper macheing, I try to keep my strips about this long, and you want to make sure you're only using 1 layer of paper at a time, okay? So the reason I like the glue mixture better is because I like using my hands. Remember I mentioned before, if you were going to do the Mod Podge or a pouring or matte medium, that you would want to use a foam brush or a paintbrush with that. I don't like that process. Some people prefer that because they don't like touching this slimy, goopy stuff. I'm an art teacher. I don't mind getting dirty. So I prefer to use my hands. So if you're gonna do this with a brush, you're gonna want either a thick brush or a foam brush is even better, because then you can just throw it away. One of those cheap 25-cent foam top brushes, which I have somewhere, but I'm not gonna bother looking for them. And all you would do is when you dip the brush in, you have to put some down first, put your newspaper over it, and then paint over the top with that, so that you're getting a good layer of glue on both sides of that paper. But previously mentioned, I prefer to use my hands. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start on this side just so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take my strip. Okay, so I put the strip in my hand, then I'm going to take some of my glue on my other hand, and I'm just going to coat one side, flip it over, and get it nice and goopy in there. Okay, you really want to saturate that paper on both sides. And then I'm just going to smooth it down over the surface of my sculpture, okay? So now I'm gonna just continue. You wanna make sure that you're overlapping your pieces, smoothing the edges down. When I get to areas like the ear, I kinda wanna smooth that out as much as I can there. When I get to areas like the hair and I want a little more of that texture, then I can leave it. But you got to make sure that you're coating everything. You don't want any areas unexposed. Now around this ear here, I'm going to make sure that I separate the ear from the hair, because I want that to be a separate entity. But then I have to go behind the ear. So I have to go to take another little piece here, and I have to get this area behind the ear so that that bottle is no longer exposed, okay? And I want to make sure that I go all the way around each of the hair pieces. So here I'm going to start, you see that? I'm going to start here and go all the way around. And you might drip, which is why I'm working on, you know, you can't see it, but I do have my work surface covered in newspaper because it'll just be less cleanup. And since, of course, too, because I have to do projects for 3 different classes in here, I don't really want glue all over my table. Plus, this is my art room and I take care of my stuff and I want to keep it nice. So it's better to, they say an ounce of preparation is worth something. I probably should maybe not quote things that I don't know the whole quote to. But long story short, it's better to prepare rather than to clean up later. So putting a little bit of paper mache, or I'm sorry, newspaper down will help. You can see that I'm like really trying to massage this down and smooth it down into the shape that I want it. I'm gonna start working on this. I'm gonna speed up the camera so that you don't have to see every single step, but you will get the gist of what we're trying to accomplish. Remember, the important thing is that every bit needs to be covered. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that I've got the whole thing covered. Don't see any masking tape. Kind of tried to shape things a little bit as I went. Now some of this can still change a little bit with my second coat, but I got my first coat done. Now I need to let this dry completely. Notice I did not worry about covering the whole back, but I did cover the whole front of that part that he is attached to. And the main reason I didn't worry about the back is because that's going to be against a wall, but I did want to do the front because it does add that little bit of stability to that piece of cardboard, and that cardboard was already starting to bend because kids got a hold of it because they think it's awesome. So this is where I'm going to let this dry for the week, and all I'm going to do to let it dry is I'm just going to set it like this on its on a piece of newspaper. If the newspaper rips off and gets onto the back, that's totally fine. Okay, so I guess we'll see you next week.